From our Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. Our top story tonight. Ireland's Deputy Prime Minister has announced that his country will join the South Africa-led genocide case against Israel before the International Court of Justice, or ICJ. Michael Martin says that while the court will determine whether genocide has occurred, there have been blatant violations of international humanitarian law on a mass scale. South Africa's case outlines Israel's actions, including significant Palestinian casualties, displacement, and conditions of starvation. Despite a preliminary ruling from the ICJ in January ordering Israel to prevent genocidal acts, Palestinian and international human rights groups say Israel has disregarded the directive. The move reflects growing international scrutiny of Israel and support to hold it accountable amid its war on Gaza. A majority of Americans now disapprove of Israel's military actions in Gaza, according to a Gallup poll released on Wednesday. Results from the survey conducted earlier this month show approval for Israel's war has dropped from 50% to 36% since November, while 55% of Americans polled currently disapprove of it. As many as 74% of U.S. adults say they are following news of the Israeli-Hamas situation closely. This is similar to the 72% Gallup measured in November. All three major political parties in the U.S. have become less supportive of Israel's actions in Gaza than they were in November. That includes declines of 18 percentage points in approval among both Democrats and independents, and a 7 percentage point decline among Republicans. Earlier this week, the UN Security Council passed a resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza during the month of Ramadan. The U.S. abstained from the vote rather than use its veto. As a result, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu canceled a visit by his senior advisors to the White House. Israel has killed more than 32,000 Palestinians and injured over 74,000 amid mass destruction of hospitals and other critical infrastructure since it began its war on Gaza last October. It has also pushed 85% of Gaza's population into internal displacement amid acute shortages of food, clean water, and medicine. A report published Monday by the New York Times is countering its own story published nearly 3 months earlier about members of Hamas allegedly sexually assaulting Israeli women during its October 7th attack. The report acknowledges a video taken by an Israeli soldier showing the bodies of 3 female victims fully clothed and with no apparent signs of sexual violence at a home where many residents had believed the assaults occurred. On December 28th, the Times published a lengthy investigative report delving into the alleged rape and sexual violence by Hamas on October 7th. It included statements from an unidentified paramedic belonging to an Israeli commando unit. Several media outlets, including the Associated Press, CNN, and the Washington Post, published similar narratives attributed to an anonymous military paramedic. The Times article cited 3 alleged victims of sexual assault. 2 of them, from Kibbutz Be'eri, were described with enough detail to potentially identify them as sisters with the last name Sharabi, aged 13 and 16. Michael Pakin, a spokesperson for Kibbutz Be'eri, categorically rejected the allegations about the sisters, saying while they were shot, they were not subjected to sexual abuse. Further undermining the credibility of the allegations, Pakin called into question the reliability of testimony by an Israeli Special Forces paramedic who was the primary source for the Times article. According to the latest Times report, residents of the kibbutz commented on the newly surfaced video footage. They said only one home in Kibbutz Be'eri housed the 2 teenage girls who were killed and dismissed claims of sexual assault. The report included comments from Anili Bar Sinai, a member of the kibbutz group investigating the allegations, saying this story is false. Palestinians are describing a temporary pier being constructed by the U.S. on the shores of Gaza City as an occupation port. On March 7th, President Joe Biden announced that he had ordered the U.S. military to build a temporary pier off Gaza for the delivery of much-needed humanitarian aid. Meanwhile, Israel continues to let only a trickle of aid into Gaza by land. The U.S. Department of Defense says construction of the temporary pier could take up to 60 days, after which 2 million meals per day would be provided to Gaza. Palestinian requests for equipment to remove the debris of homes bombed in months of Israeli attacks to retrieve the bodies of the deceased and aid the wounded have gone unanswered. In recent weeks, with the support of the U.S., bulldozers and trucks sent by Israel to the Gaza border have transported thousands of tons of rubble from demolished homes in Gaza, along with body parts. They have been moved to the shore to be used in the construction of the new pier. Speaking to Anadolu News Agency, Palestinian political animist Osama Abdul Hadi accused the U.S. and Israel of not being honest about the project. Abdul Hadi warns the pier will be built to strengthen Israel's sovereignty on the coast, to render the Rafah border crossing ineffective, to end Palestinian sovereignty, and to encourage the migration of the people of Gaza. He says Israel has blockaded Gaza, closed border crossings, and hindered the entry of humanitarian aid. Abdul Hadi also explains that the U.S. and Israel seek to control part of the Gaza coast under the pretext of protecting the pier, facilitating the delivery of humanitarian aid, and preventing Hamas from controlling the area. Israel stands accused of genocide at the International Court of Justice. In January, it issued an interim ruling ordering Tel Aviv to stop genocidal acts and take measures to guarantee humanitarian assistance is provided to civilians in Gaza. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis on Monday signed into law a highly debated bill aimed at restricting children's access to social media platforms. HB 3 prohibits children under the age of 14 from becoming social media account holders. It allows 14 and 15-year-olds to become account holders with parental consent. House Speaker Paul Renner said dangerous social media leads to higher rates of depression, self-harm, and even suicide. Critics argue the bill is unconstitutional and that it could face legal challenges from the tech industry. Courts have blocked similar legislation in other states. The legislation also protects the ability of Floridans to remain anonymous online. It requires pornographic or sexually explicit websites to use age verification to prevent minors from accessing sites inappropriate for children, according to DeSantis' office. The state's legislature had passed a bill in February that would have banned children under 16 from social media. DeSantis vetoed that bill, raising concerns of infringement on parental rights. This amended version takes effect January 1st, 2025. Sweden's Migration Appeals Court has confirmed deportation rulings against Salan Mika. Following the court's decision, Momika told the country's Express newspaper that he has left Sweden and relocated to Norway, where he plans to seek asylum. Momika made headlines for burning the Quran on several occasions in Sweden. On June 28, 2023, during the Islamic holiday Eid al-Adha, he set fire to the Quran outside the Stockholm mosque under police protection. Further incidents occurred in July when Momika desecrated the Quran and the Iraqi flag in front of the Iraqi embassy in Stockholm and in front of the Swedish parliament. On August 24th, he repeated the act outside the Stockholm mosque. Protests erupted in Malmö on September 3rd after Momika burned the Quran again, leading to the arrest of 15 individuals attempting to intervene. Most recently, on October 21st, Momika organized a rally in central Stockholm in support of Israel, where he burned the Quran and the Palestinian flag. In response to such incidents, on December 7th, the Danish parliament passed legislation outlawing the burning of sacred texts and any attacks on them. Russian children's rights ombudswoman Maria Lvova-Belova presented an award Tuesday to a 15-year-old Muslim boy who saved more than 100 people during last week's shooting at a concert hall. At least 139 people were killed and more than 180 injured on March 22nd when gunmen opened fire at Crocus City Hall in the city of Krasnogorsk, approximately 15 miles from Russia's capital, Moscow. Lvova-Belova arrived at Islam Khalilov's school and presented him with a diploma for dedication, courage, and personal bravery. The teenager worked part-time at the Crocus City Hall concert venue as a cloakroom attendant and was on duty when the shooting occurred. The boy saw people panicking and loudly announced that he was an employee, that he knew where the exits were, and pointed out the way, making sure no one was left behind. Speaking at the ceremony, he attributed his action to the way he was raised, saying his father taught him to always help people. The teenager also said many people have been writing to him on social media, thanking him for saving the lives of their relatives. Russia's investigative committee says it has detained 11 people in relation to the attack, including 4 perpetrators. A Moscow district court charged the 4 late Sunday with terrorism. The world wastes over 1 billion meals every day. Details after the break, so stay tuned, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. More than 1 billion meals a day were wasted in 2022 around the world. This is while 783 million people were affected by hunger and a third of humanity face food insecurity. That's according to a UN report released Wednesday by the UN Environment Programme, which found that almost 1/5 of all food available to consumers was wasted. Approximately 60% of food waste happened at the household level, while food services were responsible for 28% and retail 12%. According to the report, food waste is not just a rich country problem. It also found that hotter countries appear to generate more food waste per capita in households. The document suggests that this could be due to higher consumption of fresh foods with substantial inedible parts and a lack of strong temperature-controlled supply chains. Food loss and waste generate 8 to 10% of annual global greenhouse gas emissions, which the document says is almost 5 times that of the aviation sector. Meanwhile, the toll of both food loss and waste on the global economy is estimated at roughly $1 trillion. The UN Food Waste Index report is tracking progress to meet the goal of halving food waste by 2030, particularly in retail and food services. According to the report, many low and middle income countries continue to lack adequate systems to reach the goal. Over the past decade, more than a third of migrant deaths were from countries in conflict or with large refugee populations. That's according to a new report released by the International Organization for Migration on Tuesday. The report highlights the dangers faced by those attempting to flee conflict zones without safe passage. Information on the identities of missing migrants is highly incomplete, as it found that there is a high number of unidentified deaths. Ugochi Daniels, the IOM Deputy Director General for Operations, says the toll on vulnerable populations and their families urges us to turn the attention on the data into concrete action. Meanwhile, nearly 60% of deaths documented during migration are linked to drowning, the report found. During the last 10 years, more than 63,000 deaths and disappearances were documented. In 2023, the report said more than 8,000 people are known to have died or disappeared during migration, the highest figure recorded in any year in the past decade. It marks a 20% global increase in migrant deaths. The United Nations Children's Fund says at least 45 million children are facing severe food insecurity worsened by climate change in several Eastern and Southern African countries. In a statement, UNICEF Director for Eastern and Southern Africa, Eva Kadili, said millions of people are living through multiple and often overlapping crises. These have intensified by the 2023-24 El Niño weather phenomenon, one of the strongest on record. Nutrition advisor for UNICEF in Eastern and Southern Africa, Christiane Rudert, says many countries in her region have very high rates of child stunting or acute malnutrition. She notes that rates are getting worse because of extreme weather patterns, such as a prolonged heat wave and drought associated with climate change. The U.S. says it does not support a Pakistan-Iran gas pipeline project from going forward. A U.S. State Department spokesperson told reporters in a press briefing this week that it risks Pakistan facing sanctions for doing business with Tehran. On Monday, Pakistan's Petroleum Minister Musaddiq Malik said his country would seek to be exempted from U.S. sanctions over the long-term project between Tehran and Islamabad. It has faced delays and funding challenges for several years. The head of Amnesty International India says the Indian government's crackdown on opposition leaders and activists just weeks before national elections is reaching a crisis point. Recently, the government arrested Arvind Kejriwal, Delhi State Chief Minister and an activist with the opposition Aam Aadmi Party. It has also frozen the bank accounts of another leading opposition party, the Indian National Congress. In a statement responding to the crackdown, Chair of Board at Amnesty International India, Akra Patel, says the Bharatiya Janata Party-led Indian government's crackdown on peaceful dissent and opposition has now reached a crisis point. He warns that authorities have repeatedly exploited and weaponized various financial and terrorism laws to systematically crack down on human rights defenders, activists, critics, and political opposition, among others. Patel also says the arrest of Arvind Kejriwal and the freezing of Indian National Congress's bank accounts a few weeks before India holds its general elections show the authorities' blatant failure to uphold the country's international human rights obligations. That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell icon for the latest updates. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.